Hey everyone, Jake here for American Trucks, and in this video we're taking a look at the Bilstein B8 5100 series height adjustable front shock fitting 2009 to 2018 four-wheel drive Ram 1500s without air ride. Upgrading your shocks is an excellent way to improve the ride and handling characteristics of your truck, but these B8 5100s take things a step further. These are a super high quality shock absorber that's going to give you not just an improvement in the overall driving experience, but they can also function as a leveling kit, which makes it unique in the market. I try not to mince words when it comes to suspension modifications, and when it comes to getting some kind of lift or level on your truck, yes, we all want the look, but it should ride well too. And nobody does ride and handling better than Bilstein. Now, I've had Bilsteins on several of my own vehicles, including a set of these B8 5100s, and no matter which ones you choose, they never fail to impress. But this one in particular has some really cool features. Arguably the coolest of which is that you can adjust the physical height of where this spring perch sits, effectively giving you either a factory ride height or 2.8-inch level. So these grooves in the body of the shock right here allow for adjustment with this snap ring that comes pre-installed. So you can have these set at totally stock level like we have it right here, set right at the bottom, or you can crank it up a bit and have a little bit more than a 2.5-inch level by setting it in the very top groove here. And then your spring perch sits right about there. This is an easy way to level out your truck. It doesn't need anything additional, no blocks or anything like that. It's all contained right here within the shock. And if you do want to set it back to stock at some point, it's a pretty simple process too. Now, having that adjustability is of course really cool, but you've got to have some really solid damping to match. Otherwise, the ride is going to be severely compromised. But of course, Bilstein's got you covered here. The B8 5100s feature digressive valving technology, which is going to allow the shock to instantly react to impacts and varying different road surfaces. So inside here, you've got self-adjusting deflective disc valves, which allows for more variability in rebound, compression, and overall travel. And that's just going to add up to more control on the street or on the trail. Now, despite these being non-adjustable damping monotube shocks without remote reservoirs, the damping here is excellent, and you can definitely feel the difference in body control versus stock, whether you got it at the stock ride height or all the way up at that 2.8-inch level. Now, these are not going to ruin the ride quality by any means. In fact, it stays pretty much the same, just a little bit more firm and again, more controlled. This is a shock that really doesn't compromise in any way. So if you want something that's going to work really well in any application, this is going to be an excellent choice for you. Construction, as is the usual with Bilstein's offerings, is excellent too. You get a 46mm diameter shock body that is zinc plated for durability and good looks. Inside, you've got a chromed and hardened piston rod with that self-adjusting disc valve we were discussing a moment ago. And you get this brand new spring perch and everything and a bump stop here at the top to give you everything you need to replace your shock. Now, you are of course going to have to bring over your stock spring and the top mount as well. Make sure you give both of those things a good look over before you put them back on the truck, because it's a great time, if you're going to have it out anyway, to do a replacement should you need it. Now, Bilstein also backs their shocks up with a lifetime warranty against defects, and I can tell you from experience, they are very good about honoring that. Just make sure you save your receipt. That gives us a nice little segue to talk about pricing. Now, pricing is going to come in for these at about $200 per shock. And as you've no doubt noticed by now, I've only got one shock up here on the table, and that's because these are sold separately. So make sure that you make that quantity too when you go to buy them. That $200 price point puts these about in the middle of the range price-wise, but in my book that seems to be about right. Since you aren't getting things like adjustable damping or a remote reservoir, you are saving a bit on cost. But these are still going to provide you excellent damping control and the ability to level out your truck too. So if you're shopping for shocks and aren't looking to lift your truck all the way up to the sky, you really cannot go wrong with these B8 5100s. Now, there is also a matching rear set of shocks of the same series available, and I would highly recommend doing them all together. It's going to make a big improvement in how your truck drives, and everything is going to be nice and well matched too. Installation is going to get a 2 out of 3 on our difficulty meter, and each shock should take you about 2 hours to complete. Now, you are going to need a spring compressor to accomplish this job, as again, you do need to transfer over your stock spring and that top mount. This is why we're giving it a 2 out of 3. Now, this is a job that can be a bit finicky, but if you've got the right tools and you take your time, you can certainly get this one done at home. And to show you exactly what you've got to do, let's go ahead and hand things over to one of our AT customers. To complete this installation, you'll need your whole toolbox, including but not limited to a full socket set, a set of wrenches, an impact driver, a floor jack with jack stands, and a spring compressor.
All right, we're going to start the install of these front shocks by taking off the front wheel. You can see I've already got jack stands put in place and the truck lifted off the ground. I put one jack stand back on the frame and then one on the front subframe. Pull the tire out of the way and set it to the side. All right, now we move on to removing the shock. We'll take off, there's 3 bolts up top, one here, one right here, and then one in the back right here. It's a 15 millimeter nut, and I'm going the wrong way. And the last one. Done. We'll move on to the lower next. All right, we're going to use a 15/16 socket to remove the lower shock nut, and on the back side is a 13/16. All right, I'm gonna break this loose. Nope. Break this nut loose first. All right. Recap, we've taken the top shock bolts off, we took the lower shock bolt off, and now to give the strut assembly room to get taken out, we need to take the upper A-arm off of the knuckle, and then next what we'll do is we'll get to the steering and the steering arm and the sway bar link and remove those as well. One thing that'll be handy to have is a couple zip ties. We won't be taking the knuckle all the way off, but being able to tie it off so that it's not swinging around will help prevent damage to the brake lines. I got my 13/16 socket, and I'll be taking off the nut on that upper controller. And now you'll need to grab a hammer and a pry bar. What we're going to do is add some leverage between the two pieces here and hit right here with the hammer to pop this loose. You might have to hit pretty hard defending. But as you can see, we've got our upper arm loose. And to hold it in place while we take the other pieces off, I'm just going to put this nut on the lower portion here a little bit to help hold it in place. Now we'll move on to the other ones. Next, we're going to take the steering arm off. That's this component right here. There's one nut on the bottom that is another 13/16, and we'll take this one off. All right, as you can see, when I was hitting that, it kind of came loose. So it is another press fit, so you might need to use that same pry bar technique in the hammer and hit right here to take it off if it doesn't pop loose like mine did. Next, we're going to take off the lower sway bar connection bolt. That is a 18mm socket. Okay, next we're going to take off the upper sway bar bushing to allow the lower control arm to move out of the way to let us take the strut out. I've got a 16mm socket for the top and a 15mm wrench to hold onto the arm at the bottom. All right. And now with that free to move, and this out of the way, and we'll lower this the rest of the way. So I got my 13/16 socket. And now don't let this swing too much. And get those zip ties. All right. And now we've got our shock here. It's pretty loose. What I'm trying to do is line up the bolts back. They fell out. I'm trying to line the bolts back up at the top to give me a little bit more room to lift the shock out. Out it comes. All right, so we've got the shock removed from the truck, and it's going to be important to remember the position of these top bolts relative to where the lower shock is. The shock that we're replacing today is this piece right here, and I'll go get the other shock to show you all what the difference is. So here's the old shock and the new shock that we'll be putting in. You can see here the arms will need to match up to here. So the only piece that's being replaced is here, and there's a nut on the top that we'll be removing. This piece stays with the truck, and we'll be reinstalling that back onto this shock, along with the rings. We'll be putting the cup, there's a new cup that comes with the springs as well, so we'll be putting that on. So I'm going to take some paper and kind of wipe the shock down, and then with a Sharpie, I only have black. Silver would be ideal. You know, I'm going to mark the clock position on everything, on all these different pieces, including the shock itself. And just going down the line, we'll make sure that this line on the shock, nice and clean shock. We'll make sure that this line lines up. All right, so now the next step, and we'll be following the instructions that came with the shock now. But what we've done is we've moved the existing shock and spring unit. We've clocked the different components, and and we've clocked the upper spring relative to the upper mount. Just kind of following along here. One thing we haven't done, and we'll keep working towards, is mark where that upper spring lines up with the upper shock mount. And so that's right here. We'll give that a good wipe down. You can spray with brake cleaner and mark it as well. We'll make sure that we mark these surfaces there as well. All right. Next step is to put the spring compressors on. When doing these spring compressors, ideally you want them as close to 180 degrees from each other as you can get. Obviously within reason. Sometimes it can be tough to get these things to line up perfectly. When compressing them. So I'm going to put the first one on. Flip the assembly around. And I'll put the second one on. It's also important to try and get the nut that you'll be tightening on the side that's easiest to get to. I've had them where you get them into a spot, and as you're tightening it down, everything starts to pinch. And so, you got to watch out for these kinds of clearances here when tightening these down. Take your time, go each side at a little bit at a time. Go a little bit at a time on each side. Per the instructions, you want to go until the spring can rotate by hand. So as you can see, we got that there. And a quick safety tip, when using these spring compressors, really, when you've loaded this down, really watch where your fingers are. Pretend like these things can break at any moment, and don't put your fingers in between any of the spring components or between these areas here. If they break and separate, and that spring goes into fully extended, you can easily run into issues with getting your fingers smashed and severe damage. So be very careful using those. We are ready to remove this upper shock nut. This is probably the trickiest part of this whole operation in terms of you kind of need some specialized tools. Ram does sell a tool for it, but what I found works is I've got a 3/4 pass-through nut here that has a hole on it, and then the associated wrench to go along with it, and then I've got a 6mm Allen wrench. So what we'll do is we'll put the 3/4 pass-through on the nut. We'll put the wrench on, and we'll put the 6mm socket set in there, and then we will work on removing that shock nut on the top. Alright, so I'm going to take a wire brush and try to clean off as much of that thread surface as I can, which should help the removal of the nut. Got it. Woohoo! All right. Now we will disassemble everything, keeping it all together as much as we can. All right. We don't need the shock, the bump stop, that'll come with the new shock. I'm gonna set the spring off to the side for now. All right, so we've got the old shock now taken off. And this is a self-locking nut, it looks like. Bilstein did put a replacement, give a replacement nut. Normally with these self-lockers, once you use them once, they're done. And so you will need to replace them. All right, so now we've got the new Bilstein shock. We've got the lower spring perch here, a new lock nut on the top. This is an old washer. We've got a new washer that goes right there. And we'll be reusing the old pad on the top and the spring pad on the bottom. All right. My video cut out on me. But what we did is we used our snap ring pliers to move this circlip from the stock position to the 0.7 inch lift. As I was saying, I was doing this because one, to match the stock shocks, and two, you know, I noticed that the front end was sitting a little bit lower, even loaded with the trailer down, than the rear. And this will help kind of level it out, make it look a little bit nicer, or it'll look exactly the same based on the stock position. But you can pick what location to use based on what you want your truck to look like. All right, so now we'll get to assemble the shock. And while we have it all apart, I want to point something out. The shape of this top spring perch, there's one side that has a point. If your marks, like mine, have started to wear off, you can use this as your reference point for where to orient the shock. This stud right here should line up perpendicular here, so that you can put these shocks back on in the right orientation. So it should end up looking like this, where this is right in line with where the bolt would be going through here. So following the Bilstein instructions, we've put the washer on the top here. I've slid the spring perch with the top side this direction. And then we'll go get our spring. Make sure this doesn't roll off my workbench. And now comes the fun part, getting all this to line up. All right. Just going to get kind of an initial alignment, and I will put the top nut on. One thing I didn't show that I will now is because of the issues I had getting the top shock nut off, I went ahead and hit the threads with a little bit of anti-seize just to help us in the future. I do plan on keeping this truck for a while, and so I also plan on then replacing these shocks again when they wear out. And so if I can make my next job easier, I will. So we'll slide all this together, following the disassembly in the reverse. I'm gonna put the top shock nut on by hand as far as it'll go. And right now you don't have to worry about orientation too much. Your spring is still loose, and so everything's gonna be able to rotate. So all we're trying to do is torque down this top shock nut. And remember, right hand rule, if you use your right hand and you kind of make a fist with your thumb out, the direction your fingers point will be the bolt direction when you turn the nut, and then your thumb will point in the direction that nut will go. So we're trying to tighten, so we want to spin it this way. So that's what we'll do when the nut is tight enough to grab. All right. And we're gonna go until this bottoms out. And again, this is the 6mm Allen wrench that we were using from the first one. Bilstein also says to use that 6mm. All right, so we've kind of bottomed out. Now I did a quick internet search. It says Bilstein specs this out at a 34 foot-pound torque spec. I don't know how to do that with the through bolts. And so what I'm gonna do is just kind of tighten it as much as I can with the tools that I have. And that should be sufficient with a decent amount of force to hit the torque spec. One thing to remember is when this thing is fully assembled, the truck's gonna be pushing everything together. So I've personally never seen or even heard of an issue with this top shock nut coming loose. All right, so now that we're done and we're torqued to spec, arm torqued to spec, I'll say. Now we're gonna look at making sure our shocks are aligned the way they should. And so again, I've got that little pointy piece here. I've got the spring perch set here, and I need to rotate this bottom one to set it there. And I've got that bottom shock just about perfect. So we've got this bolt here, still recording. Center line goes right down through here and splits between the two ears on that bottom. I'm choosing to put the Bilsteins out. You can flip this around 180 degrees and have just a smooth metal surface, but you know, if we can, it makes it easy for everybody to see what's on here. Now that we're at this point, we will get our tool to, let's see, is this the right one? Again, it's for my spring compressors, it's a 3/4 inch socket, and we'll start to loosen those out. Periodically checking, making sure everything's staying in alignment, making sure the spring is in its perch in the proper locations. And as you loosen your spring compressors, it'll get harder and harder to move this. All right, so everything's kind of fully compressed at this point, and now we will go and put this on. All right, so now what we're gonna do is we are gonna reinstall the shock that assembly we just worked on. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start by putting the shock in the upper mounts and putting a couple of the screws in to help us position it, or some of the nuts in, to help us position it. And remember, the top screws here are the ones with the flange on them already. So they got the little castle nuts. We'll put that one in up top and go from there. There we go. All right. And then I also popped the bottom one in. Then we'll take our nuts and partially thread them on the top to help keep that shock in place. And always start the nuts on the threads by hand. It can be really easy to cross thread this stuff, and making sure that you don't do that will be super helpful. So now again, what we'll do, when I'm putting shock bolts on that have a long shank like this, I always try to give them a good coat of anti-seize on the rotating bit that comes in contact with the bushing. This can help down the road, preventing this bolt from seizing to the bushing. It's never fun to work on something where the bushing has seized to the bolt. Generally what that ends up meaning is not only are you replacing the shock, but you're also replacing the control arm. Now I'll put this bolt back in, and I'll kind of move the control arm around a bit to get the bolt to align. And then we're through. All right, so we've got all of our parts ready to go. What I'm going to start with is I'll start by putting that top knuckle and upper control arm bolt together. Need a knife to cut the zip ties off. All right, got that bolt in a little bit. And so what we'll do now is we'll just tighten it down. Again, we're using a 13/16 on that upper bolt. And you saw, struggle a little bit to get that in. At some point, we'll start to see the ball joint start to spin. When we get to that point, what we'll do is we'll use an open-ended wrench and a smaller wrench on the bottom of the ball joint to fully get that seated, and then we can torque it down. So we're starting to spin. So we're starting to spin a little bit while tightening this down. So I'll go and grab a 13/16 open end and some other smaller wrench for the bar. So for that, we'll need a 10mm for the bottom of the ball joint, and then a 13/16 for the top. So I've been using 13/16. It looks like a 21mm will be better. I don't have that in open-ended wrenches, so I'm gonna use what I can. All right, so we've got that upper ball joint back on. And let me go see what the torque spec is. All right, now we're torquing the lower upper ball joint nut, and that one calls for a torque of 40 foot-pounds followed by rotation of 200 degrees. So again, I'm going to use my 13/16 socket. I'm going to go 40 foot-pounds. I have my torque wrench set. 290 and about 20. So our ball joint's now torqued in. Next, I'll put the steering arm together, and this one has a similar setup. Again, 13/16 on the nut. We'll go until it spins, then we'll use our 10 millimeter to hold the bottom of the ball joint, and then 13/16 to tighten the nut down. And then the torque specs for that steering arm is 20 foot-pounds plus 90. So there's 20. And then we'll go 90 from there. All right, last up. My light guide. Last up is this upper sway bar. To a 16 millimeter. And we were using the 15 millimeter to hold it. And then for that upper stabilizer bolt, 20 foot-pounds is the torque spec. All right, now we need to tighten the lower strut. I'm going to use a crescent wrench on the back side, and then a 15/16 socket on the front to tighten it down. Okay, and then the torque spec for this is 125 foot-pounds. All right, got my wrench set at 125 foot-pounds. Clicked. All right, and now we need to tighten down our upper strut bolts. That's not the one I used. It's a 15 millimeter. Get them tightened down initially. Using the short 15mm helps get the bolt tightened down more, and then a long 15mm to finish tightening them. And the torque spec for those bolts is 45 foot-pounds. So I got my torque wrench set at 45. One. Two. Three. And we're done.
That's gonna wrap it up here for our review and install of the Bilstein B8 5100 series height adjustable front shock, fitting 2009 to 2018 four-wheel drive Ram 1500s without air ride. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, for all things Ram, be sure to keep it right here at AmericanTrucks.com.